going on YouTube? This is Tap Nuo, and I am a minimal techno artist from Los Angeles. Today, I'm going to be doing a breakdown on how I made the record The Crab People of Wilmington, which is now available on my new album, Fake Techno, so I'll put the link for that in the description. Definitely go check that out. Thank you to everyone who's been supporting the album, supporting the tracks. I've gotten a lot of feedback from, some people like this Crab People track, some people like the Alien track, some people like Dash D, but and of course, there's the great collaborations with 92 Jelani and Glowphase, as well as the remix by Insicle. And personally, the whole thing's my favorite, but I'm obviously biased. But anyways, let's get into it today of how I made this record, The Crab People of Wilmington. So give you a little example. Now, this track was inspired by like 1,000 crabs that I saw. I was in Wilmington, North Carolina at the USS Carolina, the old, Navy ship. And underneath it, there's all this like swamp kind of really saturated soil that these crabs it seemed like thousands. I don't know how many there actually were, but just this army of crabs were crawling underneath it. And when I was there, it gave me this visual in my head of like, what if there was a song that could kind of capture that? And at the time I was working on all these different records, and I wanted to make something that captured that sort of crab energy, I guess. The Crab People also comes from that South Park episode, which is hilarious. And so it just kind of fit. And this song has what I call a crab sound, which is something. Yeah, there we go. It's this crab sound, which is like, it's really interesting. I guess I could start with that because that was kind of the initial idea. I mean, usually I start with the drums, but this sound really was something that I hadn't done before, and I wanted to experiment with this technique. So it's the Alchemy synthesizer, or I guess it's more than just a synthesizer. It has samples and stuff. So here it's playing more of a sample, but I was going through different sounds in Alchemy, and I didn't want to get something that was super musical per se. So I wanted something that was more of a texture, something that would cut through the mix in a much more unique way than just a generic arpeggiated synthesizer. So I found this, I was just going through different sounds, and I eventually stumbled upon this Footsteps Gravel preset, which on its own, let me pull up, see if I can hear this. Yeah, so you kind of hear it's like, it's just different pitches of that same sound. And I had, some different ideas of more simple rhythms than what you're seeing on the final drums. But I had, just like a little 4 on the floor and some very basic drums. And what I started to do is I literally just did Command K, opened up the musical typing, and I just started like mashing keys because it's such a non-melodic sound. You can kind of get away with just going crazy with it. So I eventually made an entire arrangement out of the basic drums that I had, and I obviously will get to how I, added different textures and layers to the final drums. But I went through it, and I had this, simple arrangement. And I kind of started tweaking things along the way. As you can see, these different clips are muted, and I have this synthesizer with the crab or footsteps kind of sound, but I wanted to have it sound almost like a crab was chewing on something or, gnawing with its claws. So throughout the record, I had this musical typing open, and I just started mashing keys and recording it. And sometimes going really high up in octaves, sometimes keeping it more consistent so that it could have, those first 16, 32 bars you could mix in. But the goal was to make something that doesn't repeat exactly, because the drums are so consistent. I wanted to have a main lead sound that really stands out in the mix. And so how I did that was I had obviously that preset from Alchemy with the footsteps. And then in the step effects in Logic, so if I go through and open up this automation, a lot of this automation is changing settings in the actual step effects in Logic. So like you can see here, the reverb changes, the delay mix changes. So it's just a couple different parameters that I went into latch mode, and as it was playing, I just, gave it more of a live sound. Now, another thing I should also note on the step effects, and I've mentioned this in previous videos about Logic tutorials, the reverb in the step as well as I think the fat effects is a totally different reverb than the other stuff available in Logic. I don't know what's going on with the algorithm or something, but it's hitting right. And it's a type of reverb that really cuts through the mix. Even if you change these settings, you still end up with a super unique sounding reverb. And what's cool is you can just do it straight on the channel. Obviously, you could, if you wanted to, make an aux track and really get custom with how you want to blend the sounds. But for the sake of this sound, I went into it with the intention of it was going to be a little bit back in the mix, not the most forward thing overall, but if it's muted, you definitely notice it. So I have that. And then other than that, it's just some tube EQ, like a Pultec style EQ, boosting the highs to get those really crispy, higher octave sounds to stand out a little more. And then just, some EQ cutting off the sub frequencies. And I think when I actually took this into the studio, I sidechained ever so slightly this lead sound just to get the drums a little tighter. I should also note, and I've mentioned this in other videos, part of my process is, at least when I'm working in Logic, not mixing too much in the production stage. I used to mix as I would go in older records, but I'm at the point now where I'm mixing before I'm even laying a sound down. And what I mean by that is I'm choosing sounds that are like a puzzle piece, that they fit together to where they don't need too much sculpting. And I did, of course, mix this record down, and what you're hearing today is like a final draft of it, because I take things to the studio and I mix analog on an API console for a couple reasons. One is I like to have that sort of separate stage, so I can produce and get as close as I can to how it sounds in my head before I get to the studio, and then just like complement what I've already got. And two, so that I don't have to get caught up in, like, I can just focus on writing and doing sound design, and not spend too much time like, obsessing over what frequency I scooped out in a snare or something. And there were some things here where, like, on the snares on this record, in this version of it, they're very thin. And on the final version of the record, it's much thicker. And there's not actually any additional layers coming in. That was part of the mixing process. So in that instance, I'll just show you for sake of example. What I did with that is I did the altar boy, and I actually just pitched the snare. I did it down like that, and then I just blended it in the actual studio. But on this one, I didn't think to do it at the time, but then I had the idea when I was mixing just to get a little more beef out of the snare, and it really complemented things. But anyways, I'm kind of rambling here because I'm just going off the dome. So let's break into how I did the kick. The kick is very straightforward. It's just the drum synthesizer in Logic. And I wanted like a really warm kick, something that wasn't too in your face, that wasn't gonna like really distract from the mix. I know sometimes in techno, especially more warehouse styles of techno, people want the kick super forward, super aggressive, super in your face. But I've noticed for minimal stuff that's more like, I guess, tucked in there and understated, it's actually more beneficial to have the kick like not um how do I say this? Not like yelling at you. You know, you want the kick like obviously there and it's the backbone of the record, but it doesn't need to like announce itself. It's just you're gonna feel it, you know. And if you listen to like a lot of Ricardo Villalobos records, his kicks are not super aggressive in the mix, and they hit perfect. They hit on a huge sound system. Those kicks actually sound better than kicks that are super blown out because the speakers are so large and there's so much low end on the kick that you don't need to like over exaggerate it by adding a lot of distortion in the mid range and high frequencies. So I just got this kick that I really liked just by tweaking the drum synth. And in the final version of the record, there is, I believe, a little tiny bit of the Sound Toys Decapitator. So there's a little bit of that in the final mix. I usually gravitate towards the T or the P, I think. These are just different styles of, I guess, color or flavor, however you want to put it. But the final version has that. And then the final version also has, I believe, the distressor. Those are usually my go-tos in the studio. But again, just complementing what is already here. So that kick then starts to talk to these toms. And I suppose I should play them all at once for more context. So there's a couple things going on here. The first tom is a sample from a website called freesound.org. And I really love that website. It's I don't know why people use Splice. Everyone uses Splice, and it leads to a lot of music sounding, I think, exactly the same because they're getting their samples from the same place. Freesound.org has been around longer than Splice. There's a lot more unique sounds on there. And especially for the type of techno that I like to do, because I'm so obsessed with mid 2000s minimal techno, that freesound.org website, I think, was a lot bigger in like 2010. And there's even sounds that were uploaded in like '07, '06 from that website. And that is the kind of stuff I'm trying to find, is samples that not everyone and their brother is going to have. So this sample it's kind of almost like a modular bass groove that I found, and I did a little tempo adjustment to it, and just am EQing to keep it in that low range. And again, these toms were all designed to kind of talk to each other and fill out different parts of the frequency spectrum. So the next tom that it plays with is this guy, which is actually just emphasizing part of the groove for that first tom. And it occupies a little bit higher in the frequency range, just to add some, further, I guess, characteristics to that main groove. And then we have another tom. Oh, and I should note too, the drum synth on here, I mean, it's just same as the kick, just dialing in settings that I feel are appropriate. So we have another tom here, which is pretty, I mean, it's similar. It's a little dirtier, I guess. Again, from freesound.org, and it's just filtered to occupy kind of that same frequency range. And then we've got another one here. So if we play all those together, you start to hear that sort of push-pull rhythm. And that push-pull rhythm works really well with the kick. Has a little teeny tiny bit of swing to it. And some of that is just by adjusting specifically where on the grid things are. Now there's another tom here, which I believe was, yeah. So that was actually made in Ultra Beat with these sounds. And then I printed that. So it's Ultra Beat with a little bit of Space Designer, or I guess a lot of bit of Space Designer, and then a little bit of EQ, and just narrowing the stereo field. Because toms like that occupy that frequency range, they don't need to be super wide. Especially like by the time this record was mastered, the low end is already going to be folded, by the time you get to the mastering stage. So we've got another tom here, which is, I think, yeah, it's another freesound.org sound, which was, I think, at a slower tempo, and I sped it up. And a little bit of sidechain compression going on that one, as well as just some EQ, some fat effects, which, let's see what these are doing. So the fat effects on here is essentially just shifting it lower in the frequency spectrum to kind of complement those existing toms. So let's play all those together. And that tom 6, yeah, that last tom was kind of like the top of the toms to fill out the frequency towards more of the mid-range. So now we're going to get to the hi-hats as well as the percussion. Hi-hats are really simple on this record. I'm pretty sure all of it is Ultra Beat. Yeah, let's see. Ultra Beat. Oh, drum synth, Ultra Beat. Yeah, Ultra Beat. Ultra Beat is a really great tool in Logic. You can design different patterns and right click and randomize and shift things and just see what works. So in this case, I just had just some different hi-hats from the hi-hat bank. Let's see, what was next? Yeah, second hi-hat is, I mean, that sound, you can get a sound like that from Ultra Beat or obviously the synthesizer. I mean, that's a pretty standard, just kind of thin hi-hat sound. More metallic. And then hi-hat 3. So I drew that in on here. Hi-hat 3 is a little more shuffled. Not too much, just like 55% swing. But other than that, it just has a little bit of EQ to cut out some of those super sharp frequencies. Now, I should also note these hi-hats, of course, like the other things in this record, were processed analog. I think I did some group processing on these. They might have a little bit of like parallel compression, if I remember correctly, from the studio, from one of the hardware compressors. And that's really just to bring out, the good stuff that already exists in there, just to kind of emphasize it. So hi-hat 4, basically the same thing. It's just Ultra Beat with a pattern that I drew in, and then Space Designer with a micro plate. So it's just to send it slightly back in the mix, because sometimes hi-hats, when they're dry, they can be a little boring, I guess. Like they won't have context in the rest of the record, in the, I guess, the atmosphere of the record. So all those hi-hats together, as well as all the toms and the kick, as you can see, I mean, it's a really locked in groove. It's a classic minimal techno style of groove, and the tempo, I think, is a good tempo for this kind of rolling vibe. So I had those drums, but even though it's minimal techno, we want to keep things simple, but you can't. I mean, technically you can just do drums if you want, but I like to add more than just drums to my records, because that's how it turns into more of a song. And we have these percussion elements, which are so simple, but personally, I feel they're very effective, and it's like an earworm. It kind of gets stuck in your head because there's this sort of call and response going on. So call and response, especially in techno music, is super effective. And I think I'm going to start doing more of it. because it just gets stuck in your head. So I have the Ultra Beat with, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so I had this different kind of hi-hat of sorts in there initially, and once I took it into the actual MIDI window, I changed a few things. So it's the Ultra Beat kit with the effects bank specifically. And then there's a little bit of Space Designer, which is, if we play it without Space Designer, what does that sound like? Yeah, so not too much of a difference. Kind of the same technique as the hi-hats before, just tucking it in a little bit, sending it back in the mix ever so slightly. And that plays off of perk 2, which is actually like not really much going on with this one. That's all it is. So it's the same kit. It's just these, yeah, these guys that I had muted in the first part are now in here. And it's somewhat of a turnaround. I mean, by the time you get to the whole record with everything playing, you don't really hear it that much. What I did though is the bit crusher with a lot of, I guess, mix on there. And the bit crusher is a great tool to get things to just stand out a little bit more in the mix. So that really helped out, as well as just some EQ to keep it up in the top range. So from there, we have a snare with which is 2 layers. And that's really straightforward. Again, the whole thing is, I mean, this might look very simple, but it's very well thought out sounds that, again, it's like a puzzle. It's not, I don't like to just throw in whatever random sound and then try and put 50 different plugins to try and get it to sound how I like. I think it's much better to start with good material. It's like getting a good recording. You want to get the cleanest recording possible so you don't have to clean it up later. And that's what I did with these snare sounds. It's just okay, so yeah, we got to turn that on. It's just the drum synth, again, snappy snare and Ultra Beat. Now, there's a little bit of automation, if I'm not mistaken, on one of the snares. Yes. So there's a little bit of automation just with like the noise of the snare at times. So it kind of opens up in certain parts just to add a little more groove to the record. But for the most part, it stays pretty tight, it stays pretty consistent. So from there, I mean, that's literally all the drums. Like, let's hear those. Yeah, so for different parts of the arrangement, I just, muted the kick, muted different toms, muted different elements, just to keep things moving. But other than that crab sound, we just have different atmospheric sounds. So I'll just play all those together. Oop. And those are sidechained as well. Not too much. I don't like to have things super pumping crazy too much, because I think with minimal, you want things, again, more understated. Like if this was a more EDM type of record, then you can get away with super, vacuum kind of sidechain. But I'm not personally into that kind of stuff. So we have this self-modulation patch, which I found from Freesound. A lot of the sounds on this particular record are from Freesound, and of course, manipulated in different ways. I don't think I saved it, but I might have Paul stretched this. So I'm pretty sure that this sound actually was different in the beginning. It was a much faster sound. And then Paul stretch is great. It's a feature that you can use, I'm pretty sure, in multiple different DAWs, but the way I do it is in Audacity, which is a free program. Definitely recommend that. Paul stretch just takes one sound and it makes it super long with like minimal artifacts. So where you get more of like a consistent atmosphere out of something. And it works great on vocals, on synth sounds, on really anything. You can get super creative with it. And I did that, and just let's play that. So that's also why there's not like that much reverb on this track. on other parts of the track. Like even the crab sound doesn't have that much because the main Atmos sounds have so much reverb on them. I don't want things just swimming around. So I have, other than an EQ, I just have like an ambient kind of setting on Space Designer, as well as just some side chaining. And then from there, and I kind of cheated it a little bit. The sound didn't Paul stretch to the exact length of the record, so I just did some crossfades in and out. Oh yeah. So from there, this is actually from the Logic Loop library. And as you can see, it's Abstract Atmosphere 140, which without processing sounds like this. So I didn't like that sort of low hum sound. So I just scooped that out because that part that I scooped out is kind of being occupied by the previous Atmosphere track. And then just some Space Designer just to give it a little more ambience. So, and that yeah, that plays really nicely just alongside the existing Atmosphere. And I liked these too because they have that sort of like tension, something's about to go down kind of feeling that I was trying to go for. Again, going back to the theme of like, what if there was this army of crabs that was, about to do some sort of military operation on the beach under this USS warship, and they're like living their own little virtual reality kind of. I don't know. I was on one when I came up with this idea, but the point is the atmosphere is really what kind of sets the tone for the record. So this one is this particular sound, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. I'm almost certain that is actually just this sound. And then what I did is, yes. Okay, so without the processing, it's just a filtered version of that same tom. And then I took the step effects and I've just got the ambience reverb setting as well as some delay. Let me check if I don't remember if I put some automation. No, I don't think so. Yeah. So this concept that I had to do was because I wanted to almost have like an effect that plays off of one of the existing toms just to keep things like it's almost like it's going to be a familiar type of sound but subconsciously because you don't know that it's being made off of the same initial sound. I don't even know if that makes sense, but so as you can see too, a lot of the frequency, the mid-range frequency is being taken up, or range, I guess, is being taken up by that first one. So this first one is kind of the main character, and then these guys are just like supporting actors. And then on top of that, it's just the crab sound. And if I play it again, yeah. Another thing I should note, I totally forgot to mention on the toms. In the studio, I had two distressors which were set up parallel, and they were on the like most extreme setting. I had these slammed, and then I sent the toms into that and kind of blended them in parallel. And what I was worried about when I was finished with the mix after listening to the processing that I did on the toms, it added a lot of really cool distortion. It almost made like a bass line out of what was coming into those distressors. But because I had it stereo, and next time I'm going to rethink how I do this. Because I had it stereo and they were at such extreme settings, the distressors, it was hard to get exactly perfect left and right balance. So they leaned a little bit in one direction. And I was worried that by the time the release actually came out, that it was going to be noticeable. But when I got this record mastered, the mastering actually kind of balanced everything out. And what it also did is it got the transients out in a way that I wasn't able to get in the mix. And this was a record where when I heard the master, this was like my favorite master out of the whole album because it nailed exactly how I was trying to get the transients of the toms to sound, and I didn't want to over process it in the studio. So the lesson I guess I'm trying to say is that sometimes even when you're producing and mixing, you have to think about how the master is going to change the record as well. So if you really over process your transients, if you really, overcook your stuff, by the time it gets mastered, it's going to sound like, like you put it in the oven too long and you burned it. And that's again why I'm trying to emphasize this sort of less is more approach, because I think people actually underestimate how much mastering can change your song. A lot of people think it's just making things louder, and it's so much more than that. It's down to the transients and how things are going to be shaped by however, whoever's mastering it does their compression and whatnot and limiting. And as well as stereo image, this record came out a little bit narrower than I would have liked initially. And then after hearing it a few times, it made perfect sense to not have things too crazy wide. And that is all thanks to Ambivalent. Ambivalent is a minimal techno pioneer. He's a DJ, a good friend of mine that I've been working closely with the past few months, I guess, past year almost. I have a release with 92 Jelani on his label, Valence 17. But the point is, Ambivalent mastered this album. He mastered every track on the album. And however he did it, it was exactly what I was trying to go for. And I think that's because he also masters things analog. There's a lot of benefits to doing things analog. I know there's an ongoing debate about digital versus analog, but what I'll say about that is produce digitally and mix analog. Then you get the best of both worlds. So on that note, please subscribe. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, comment, all that good stuff. Have a great rest of your day and keep on rocking.